Once you speak to a team leader, they say, oh, I'm nervous because I don't know how to prep my stuff and it's all about them. Empathy is the secret sauce because if they were thinking more about their audience, they wouldn't care about how they look, how they sound. They just want to make sure that their message is getting across.
Right, Tracey. Welcome to the 3 Points podcast. I'm so delighted you're here.
I'm delighted to be here.
This is great to have you actually physically in Belfast.
I love being in Belfast. This is such a cool city. Every time I come here, there's something new to discover. It's a really great place.
Thank you very much. So we are going to talk about your theme today, which is empathy and communication. Mm-hmm. I'm really excited about this because, as we talked about, it's near and dear to my heart. Plays a big role in a lot of the work that we're doing at People Playbook. But, you know, this is your space. This is your field. I'm so curious about, you know, what does that mean and why is it so important to you?
So when I was invited to come on and say, think of 3 points that you'd want to share with someone. Obviously, it's communication because that's my bag. I do media training and I teach people how to speak better and how to lower the barriers. And I thought, I'll talk about the things that I discovered during my years of coaching. So the things that I want to talk about are the empathy. People simply aren't thinking about that. People aren't thinking about who their audience is, how their message is being received, how they should adjust their content based on the audience. For me to learn that people hadn't been thinking of that kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, I love that. And it is amazing because you do so much within the communication space, but I'm so curious about, it sounds like there's a big gap in the empathy piece, and that's what's drawing you to it. But why is that so important in communication? Just to sort of set the scene before we dig into your 3 points.
You know why? Because it's the Holy Grail. It's the Holy Grail. You know, if you're a professor and you're teaching in school, I work with people who have been professors in the past, and they tell me, I'm not as nervous talking in front of people. And the reason is because when they had been speaking in the past, they were connecting with their students. And they were always thinking, who's getting this? Who in this classroom is getting this? I think I have to re-explain this part. I'm looking at some faces and people look a little bit confused. So I'm going to give another example for that one. And so that is an example of someone who does have empathy while they're speaking because they're checking to see whether they're being heard, whether they're being understood, and they adjust accordingly. So in my experience, people who have a history of speaking to students have more empathy when they're talking. But guess what? Once you speak to an executive, a team leader, they say, oh, I'm nervous because I don't know how to prep my stuff and I don't speak very well and it's all about them.
Yes.
And so that's why empathy is the secret sauce, because if they were thinking more about their audience, they wouldn't care about how they look, how they sound. They just want to make sure that their message is getting across.
Yeah, this is great. This is probably the perfect jumping off point, Tracey, because your first point is all about empathy when speaking.
Yeah. So what are we doing to think about our audience? I've worked with people who have gone to make speeches on the other side of the world on very important topics. And I work with them to help them create a narrative arc to what they're saying so that they can engage the audience and reel them in, all those important things. And I say to them, so who's the audience and what's the point? Like, what are you trying to achieve? And I swear to you, Tony, it has happened that people say to me, oh, okay, I hadn't really thought of that. Let's see. Why am I speaking to this crowd? Why am I making this speech? They actually hadn't thought of it. And that kind of blows my mind.
That is wild. Like, what are you seeing when you're doing this work? And specifically, I love the executive coaching stuff that you do. And what are they thinking about? When these people are going to speak, what do you find that they're most kind of focused on?
They're thinking about themselves.
Yeah.
What their voice sounds like, what they're going to wear. How long should this be? What if I lose my notes? What if my slides don't work? It's all about them, right? So instead, if you turn that outward, all of a sudden everything becomes easier because you say, am I being understood? Is this an interesting slide for me? If I show this, are they going to get it? And so once you turn that around, the audience becomes engaged. And another little secret sauce is the emotion with which you're speaking. People get up there and they say, I'm so nervous. So I get up there and I'm just going to make my speech like this. And I'm just going to keep spewing facts at this audience. And they're speaking like robots.
That's my favorite right there. I love listening to robots speak.
We had this thing. I used to be a TV reporter and at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And there's a verb and producers know this, it's called scrubbing a tape, scrubbing audio because you can hear, you're just speeding through it to say, where's that part where he told that joke? And you'll scrub through and you'll, oh no, he's serious here. Oh no. When you're talking, when you're looking at something like a recording of, say, a politician's speech, and you scrub it, it's a thing of beauty because you can hear that at one part of his speech, he's a little bit serious. At another part of his speech, he's super engaging. At another one, he might be angry. He might be angry at the reality. And then another part, he's funny. So the reason that that's a good example is following a politician's way of talking and seeing how it goes up and down over the course of a speech is because they involved emotion in it. And that's what people aren't doing. So if you want to create empathy with your audience, allow yourself to speak with that emotion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I really like, so I mean, this is near and dear to my heart, as I mentioned, and I always, it's funny that you said the phrase of they're thinking about themselves. I mean, the kind of my number one core sort of facilitation principle is it's not about you.
Yes.
And any facilitator I work with, it's not about you. It's about the group of people in front of you that you're trying to navigate on their journey towards their goals and objectives. I'm really curious about, the preparation. I wonder, what have you seen when you're talking about empathy in speaking? What have you seen as like a good hack or a good thing to do in the moment to really demonstrate empathy when someone is speaking to a group?
So my hack is actually involved in the prep, and it's this. I encourage people to literally, hear me out here, to literally write the emotion of what a specific part of their speech evokes. So again, at the beginning of a speech, you might want to connect with the audience and you be lively and talk about something that is common to both you and the audience. But the next part of your speech might involve a little bit of frustration on how the system is currently working, right before you offer a solution or something. So instead of just speaking in stats or speaking in facts, write in the margin of the talk what your emotion is. Allow yourself to feel a little bit frustrated when you're talking about that problem. Allow yourself to sound hopeful when you're talking about the solution. So that's the hack ahead of time, is if you actually think about it and you glance down and you say frustrated, oh yeah, this is how I'm going to feel. This is how I'm going to allow myself to feel. It's not acting.
That's interesting.
It's not acting. It's just allowing yourself to sound a certain way.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I can see how people, and I'm even thinking to myself, where you get so caught up in content and material and the objectivity of what you're trying to communicate, but actually allowing yourself to feel in the moment is a way to communicate that empathy, and hopefully what you're sharing resonates, right? In terms of, it's interesting because that emotion of frustration, for example, if you're able to share that effectively and allow yourself to feel, which I love that language, as opposed to pretend or act. No, be authentic, be honest. Right. And I feel like that's in the speeches and the talks and listening to others, when they're allowing themselves to feel, I can really connect and feel like, wow, they get me and get where I'm at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is the space that you have to open up before you start to speak. And that's where the connection happens. And that's where the empathy happens, because you're thinking, are they going to connect with me? Do they hear this, right? If you want them to feel frustrated, allow yourself to feel frustrated. And that's where the connection happens.
Oh, I love that. Love that. All right, let's talk about, so we've talked a little bit about speaking. I'm curious now about, what does empathy look like on the other side, which is in the receiving or the listening? Yes.
So sometimes when we're in a professional setting, we're listening selfishly. How does this affect me? What does this mean to me? That doesn't always allow us to hear a difficult message. So think of a situation where someone is giving you feedback. We talk a lot about, in general, about how to give feedback, and there's lots of really good information out there on how to give feedback. But we have to put ourselves in a position where we're actually receiving feedback well, too. We have to be teachable. We have to be ready to hear what the other person has to say. So that's where the tables turn on the empathy, to say, this must be really hard for you to tell me this. This must be really hard for you to bring this bad news to my team. Or this must be really difficult for you to explain something complicated, even though you know that my department doesn't work in this area. So who on your team is actually giving you feedback is a question that I ask people often, and they don't have an answer. And then if they were to give you feedback, are you ready for it? Are you listening empathetically so that you can connect when you're listening to a difficult message? And not even a difficult message, an important message, or one that has an impetus to it, where you say, we got to meet this deadline. Are you listening to me? Kind of vibe, right? You need to create that.
Yeah, I love that. I can't help but get out of my head right now. I think it's Denzel Washington. I can't remember the film, and he says, "You're listening, but you're not hearing." And I love that. I love that idea, and it happens often, right? And I'm sure across a number of different contexts. What do you see are the best ways that individuals can be more empathetic when listening? Like, well, how can they lean into making sure that they're not rushing from thing to thing, or as we all do, and it's sometimes difficult because you're trying to hold the space between listening and also being able to, prepare for what you want to share next. But I couldn't agree more, right? Being present and really being teachable, as you say.
Right. You know what? You have to do a little litmus test, and you have to say, have I created the conditions for honesty? Have I created those conditions where someone will say, you know what, I know Tony and he's going to appreciate this. It's going to be difficult for me to say, but I know Tony and he's going to want to hear what I have to say to him. There's the example that's often given is, when you tell someone that they have spinach in their teeth, that was harder for the person to say it than the person to receive it. That's hard to do, right? Because but when you do that, it's an act of generosity to say, I'll be the one to tell you. And so when it comes to receiving, are you creating those conditions so that someone is comfortable to do that deed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see it all the time in this space where, and it's sometimes a lack of self-awareness where, a person may think, oh no, I'm absolutely open to hearing that I've got spinach in my teeth. But 5 times that it's happened before, you've been so embarrassed, you've snapped at the person, why didn't you tell me sooner? Or I can't believe you said this in front of others, right? And that kills it, right? That kills it. And then the next time, that person's not going to share. So I like the idea of the creating conditions. I'm just thinking about what other ways we can do that more instantly, I guess, than over time, because there is a bit of, as you said, if you know Tony, he'll benefit from this. I wonder what are the initial things you can do to help be more empathetic when you're listening? I'm a huge fan of mirroring, which we all know and love, right? When you report back to someone what you just heard off of them. And it allows for adjustments. And so a sentence can start with, what I'm hearing you say is, and that could be, just a repetition of something, or it could offer some clarity too. So you can summarize what the other person says. Have you ever read the book called Never Split the Difference? I haven't, but I've heard good things about it.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I highly recommend. And just, by way of background, the reason it's called Never Split the Difference is because it's a book on negotiating, and it's written by a man who used to do hostage negotiation.
The FBI guy.
Yes, Voss.
Chris Voss.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason it's called Never Split the Difference is if someone has taken 4 hostages, you can't say, tell you what, kill 2 of them and just give us 2 then. And I say that with a laugh.
But that would be a terrible book, Tracey. I don't think that would be on the bestseller list.
Exactly. But the thing that stands out in that book as it relates to what we're talking about now is he talks about an experiment that was done with a bunch of waiters in a restaurant. And they had 2 separate waiters go out, and over the course of an evening, one of them would do that thing, when you go to a restaurant and you ask for something special and you say, I need my steak done this way, and could you put the thing on the side and make sure that it doesn't include that? And the waiter says, yes, I got you. And you think, wait, did he hear all that? That was a lot of information. I'm not sure. I feel a little bit uneasy about that. And other waiters in this study that was done would go out and would repeat back everything that the person ordered. At the end of the evening, the waiters who had repeated back the orders to the customers got an increase in tips of a difference of 70%, 70%. And that's because people didn't feel heard when a waiter would just say, yeah, I got your order, and move on to the next person. That mirroring creates a connection, and then it just really strengthens that foundation of any kind of conversation, whether it's just a quick one-on-one next to the water cooler or whether you're making a keynote speech. Does everybody hear me, right? Am I being heard?
Yeah, I love that mirroring technique, and just clarifying. And And those of us that have put it into practice or tried to put it into practice, and listen, it doesn't always happen, right? Things are busy, we're moving fast,
Right.
and at times you don't always have the time, or you don't have the habit installed, I suppose. But yeah, the benefit also for that in my experience is it gives you even more greater clarity into actually what the person said. Or, I've had times where I've attempted this and someone said, actually, that's not at all what I meant. I'm like, thank God I checked, because I was leaving this conversation thinking one thing, I've shared it back to you, and now you've told me, actually, that's not actually what I mean, or it's not the intention behind what I've just shared. And the other thing I love that, you and I have talked about in the past is in your communication practice and executive coaching on communication skills, oftentimes you'll get people to record themselves, or you'll record them, or you'll ask them to share something, and you'll give them the opportunity, almost like an elite athlete, to get video analysis to review what they said, how they communicated. And I think you were telling me, like, oftentimes that unlocks all these blind spots, and people go, oh my goodness, that's how I'm coming across.
Yes, it's unbelievable. I want to shout from the mountaintops that everybody should be doing this, recording themselves speaking. So it could be a Zoom call. This is a reality that we have. It's an advantage that we have. But the minute people see themselves, I sometimes, guess what? They don't want to watch it. So in my exercises with people, I'll sit down and I'll mock.
Of course they don't, Tracey. I mean, the thought of them getting on recording themselves. I mean, again, we spoke about this before, and even like I do this a lot, and the thought of recording myself, it's a bit sickening, and now I've got to watch myself back, and I'm awkward, and look at that and what am I doing? What am I saying?
Yes, no, absolutely. And I joke with people, and I often say, yes, your voice does sound like that, because our voice sounds different, right, on tape and that's just a physiological thing. It vibrates differently at a different tone than what we're used to hearing. But honestly, I can tell someone all day long something they do that they should change, but when they see it in themselves, the change is instant. So just the exercise of sitting down with someone, and what I do with them is, I do media training, and I'll play the role of a reporter, but I'll do executive training, and we'll talk about the difficulty that they're having, and I'll say, okay, I'm going to play the role of person X, right? And when they see how they handle the situation, we'll sit, as you say, and we'll watch the tape just like after a game, and I'll press pause, and I'll be like, look at that, like, look how long it took you to make that statement. Did you? And they'll say, oh my God, I didn't say the thing I came to say, and that's what the whole meeting was about. When they watch themselves, it just unlocks so much clarity for them. It's really satisfying.
Yeah, no, I love that as a tactic. And I do watch myself, even if it's cringeworthy, because you have to, right, in order to get better. And yeah, I love this kind of review process. One thing I'm thinking about in terms of order your points. So far we've talked about empathy and speaking, and we talked about the importance of prep. Then we've talked about empathy and listening. And one of the things that we're often doing in our work, both with our clients, as in the individuals we're working with in an organization, and in our preparation phase, we want to understand their goals, objectives, context, and so on. But every time we're always saying, can we ask the participants, the people that are actually going to be in the audience, for their point of view? And I'm pretty resolute now at this stage that when we do that, we have a far more effective program, session, experience, versus when we don't do that. And I think, we started with speaking and then the listening. For us, I think the listening bit, when we do that first, it gives us all these incredible tools, anecdotes, stories, real specific nuggets that when it comes to facilitating or speaking or introducing a session or a program or a workshop, whatever we're working on, I often share back the findings. Yeah. And in the world, Tracey, where we live in, where folks are getting surveyed all the time and they never hear back, I think it's a disservice. So what we try and do is, when we ask all these questions, either in focus groups or surveys, I typically start off a session by saying, here's what I've discovered in my listening.
Yes.
And so therefore, this is what we're going to talk about, or this is what we're going to uncover.
Oh, amazing. See, that is an example of connecting with the audience right as it starts, right? I literally make slides of some of the feedbacks it's not even feedback because it hasn't begun, but feedback on what they want help with. And when they see their comments, up on the screen before it even starts, because it's all anonymous, right? So they know. Nobody else in the room knows who said what, but they see that they've been heard. And we say, these are the problems that we're going to solve today by the end of this session. And so the minute someone feels heard, that's just a thing of beauty, because it doesn't happen often enough.
I've never felt more under pressure to communicate effectively in this podcast, but we're going to move into your third point now, which I'm really interested in hearing your perspective on, which is the idea and the concept of team-wide empathy. So tell us a little bit more about this.
So team-wide empathy is kind of like a mixture of the two. So we've talked about speaking with empathy and listening with empathy. If you're a team leader or even a team member, you want to know, have you done everything you can to make sure that everybody on that team knows what success looks like? Because when in doubt, clarity. We talked a little bit about mirroring. That just invites clarity, right? If you wanted to stretch that even further, you could say, okay, so my takeaway from this conversation is that success will look like blank. If you can verbalize what success looks like, what it feels like, then that's how you know that the entire team is on the same page, right? If something is long and convoluted and you're working on a team, it's fun every once in a while. I like to say, there's the story, but then there's the moral of the story. What's the moral of the story here, right? The moral of the story is we have to hit this deadline. Or the moral of the story is let's take as long as it takes, but let's do it right. And that depends, right? So if you can reiterate the moral of the story when you're in a team meeting, everybody just benefits from something like that. The other thing to think about is, are you speaking in headlines? Are there takeaways that you need everybody at the table to walk away with? If you think about that in advance, what are the takeaways? What did we learn from this? That crappy feeling when you finish a meeting and you're like, what just happened? What did we just achieve in there? It was a bunch of people talking about random things and, okay, I guess that's the end of our meeting, and off you all went. That's really frustrating, and that can chip away at your morale during a workday. But if at the end of the meeting you do a little recap and you talk about what success looks like. And then the minute you talk about what success looks like, it opens the doors for people to say, here's what I can do, or here's the roadblock that I see. It's just a beautiful thing.
That is absolute gold, because I mean, I have 1,000 different stories, as I know you do, of, you come out of that 1 hour meeting and really it could have been summarized in a headline.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking out loud, Tracey, about what we've covered so far and why these things happen. And oftentimes, I think we've discussed even in this conversation is around, leading with content. Here's what I want to say, and I would argue a little bit of insecurity over. I feel like I need this, this presentation, this sharing of information to last longer, to look meatier than it actually is, because that makes me look and appear to be more competent, which is, in my experience, it has the opposite effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I like thinking of it as, the things that we want to walk away from a meeting should be summarized in shorter sentences, and they should be delivered in shorter sentences. So when someone starts off a meeting with some big, long, convoluted statement and subjunctive clauses and exceptions and caveats and all that stuff, you lose your audience. Reiterate what you want to say in nice, short sentences so that we can all engage. And then that's what gets the conversation started. So I like to give the example of, if you see an accident on the way home from work on the highway, you don't come home to your significant other and say, honey, at approximately 4:45 this afternoon, 2 cars were traveling southbound. You don't talk like that. You speak in fragmented sentences where you say, I saw this accident. This guy came out of nowhere, smashed the windshield. The driver didn't know what hit him. We speak like that. So we should be speaking like that in real life too. When you're prepping your comments for something, speak the way you would if you were talking to just one person, because that's how you're going to captivate them.
I love the moral of the story concept as well. So just in your experience in ultimately storytelling or communication, I'm thinking about all your amazing experience working with reporters, journalists. Is it useful to, and I'm thinking about the team-wide empathy, which we're discussing right now, is it useful to start off with the moral of the story, the key message, and then wrap it up? Or like, how do you like to structure?
Absolutely. So when I do media training for think tanks. So think about it for a second. They're experts in their field. They literally 40 hours a week are working on one specific thing. And then they come out with a book and they have to do media interviews on that. And they feel completely overwhelmed because they say, oh my gosh, I could go on, and they could go on for hours on this specific topic. How do I know? I don't know what people need to hear. That's where the cream has to rise. That's where you have to think in headlines. And so here's what I say to them. If you could write the headline to this article on the book that you just wrote, what would the headline be? Now, you have to think of the attributes of a headline, right? It's pithy, it's short, it's engaging. It makes you want to read the whole article, right? Sometimes it's counterintuitive. Sometimes there's something surprising in there. And guess what they say to me? Oh, I can't really think of a headline because there's so much to say that I can't summarize it. And I say, okay, well, you expect the reporter to do that then. You want the reporter to do that. And so instead, think of those honey, did you know moments, right? Where you say, honey, did you know that if the earth continues at this pace, that in 50 years, whatever it is that you know, whatever it is that the audience doesn't know, make that one of the core ideas that you can build around. Get their attention with that, share that headline with them, and then support it with your facts, with your stories, with your anecdotes, the comparisons, all of that stuff. Prepare a couple of headlines and then build upon that.
This is so powerful because I'm sitting thinking about how I can apply this learning like today,
right,
and really put it into the work that I'm doing. But I'm also thinking about, Tracey, all the different people you work with, whether they be, these incredible experts. I'm thinking about incredible thought leaders, experts, researchers, leaders in organizations who know so much, have an incredible wealth of knowledge and experience that's going to be useful for others. Mm-hmm. But they fall into the trap of not being able to do what you just described. And therefore, ultimately, they're paying the price where lack of engagement, lack of understanding, lack of clarity, and therefore, actually, it's wasted. Yeah. These books that you're talking about that have been written and researched for years with these individuals who are experts, all of their amazing accomplishments and all the things and all the value that they can bring to the world, it gets lost because their inability to communicate effectively in these pithy headlines.
Yes. And just to pile on, what I usually say to them is, I'll say, how do you feel about that? And they'll say, well, I don't feel anything. It's about, it's about the earth. And I'll say, oh, okay, so it doesn't matter that in 50 years, such and such. And they'll say, no, well, if we don't keep doing it. And then it takes 3 or 4 questions for them to just kind of scratch up the emotion and say, no, we need to tell everybody that this is happening. The average person has no idea that their lives are going to be affected this way. And I say, oh, now I can start to hear it. I can start to hear, right, a little bit of urgency, a little bit of doggedness on their part to say, no, we got to get this message out. And so we take that and then we build on that because there absolutely positively is emotion. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about becoming emotional or just ad hoc adding an emotion to a feeling, but how do you feel? You're a researcher, and they might say, you know what, I'm just happy that that the facts are clear now. And so it might be a feeling of happiness and clarity that they're bringing, but at least there's some kind of emotion attached to the facts.
Yeah, this is the perfect wrap-up moment because I feel like we've sort of dipped our toes in, Tracey, to this sort of final question, which is, how might the world change if we were to implement the 3 points you've mentioned all around empathy and communication? We've covered empathy when speaking, when listening, and in the team sort of wide context. How might the world change, Tracey? Oh
my gosh, the world would be beautiful. We'd all be wearing flowers in our hair and holding hands. People would feel heard. People would feel respected. People wouldn't feel frustrated by what's being asked of them. They wouldn't feel frustrated by a lack of progress because when everybody is on the same page because of communication, even if things aren't progressing, then you know why they're not progressing because there's communication going on. And as a result, you don't feel frustrated by it. You're just that much clearer. And so I think that there would be a lot less frustration at water coolers, a lot less gossip in the office. People saying, oh, he always wants us to do such and such. And did you hear the way she said that? She doesn't even realize that every day we're trying to do X. If you can have that empathy and say, I know your team, finds it difficult to do X, but we need to do Y. So how can we get there together? That communication reduces all those opportunities for gossip and complaining and being grumpy at work.
Yeah, I want to live in that world.
I know. So do I.
I mean, I think...
One day at a time, Tony, right?
One day at a time.
We're getting it done.
I hope so. And, I suppose my final kind of takeaway around this empathy piece is, to be clear is to be kind. And I think, let's have a kinder world, Tracey.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad you joined us here in Belfast, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your stay. Thanks for visiting us and joining the 3 Points podcast.
It was wonderful being here, and more people should visit this city.